Imagine being only 17 years old and believing that God had chosen you to save your country. Everyone around you laughs. Soldiers ignore you. Powerful men call you a dreamer. But within a single year, you lead an army to impossible victories, change the future of France, and become one of the most unforgettable figures in history. This is the incredible story of Joan of Arc, a young farm girl whose courage challenged kings, generals, and even an empire. Her journey is filled with hope, faith, war, betrayal, and sacrifice. As you listen, you will not only discover an amazing true story, but you will also improve your English naturally through clear and engaging storytelling. Welcome to History Meets English. Sit back, relax, and let history come alive, one story at a time. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Heard a Voice. The year was 1412. In the quiet village of Domrémy in northeastern France, a baby girl was born into a family of hard-working farmers. Her name was Joan. No one could have imagined that this simple child would one day become one of the most famous women in history. Joan's childhood was very different from the lives of children today. She did not go to school because most peasant girls could not read or write. Instead, she helped her parents in the fields, looked after the family's animals, and learned how to sew and cook. Life was simple, but it was never easy. France was trapped in one of the longest and bloodiest wars in European history, the 100 Years' War. For decades, England and France had fought over the French crown. Villages were burned, farms were destroyed, and thousands of innocent families lost everything. Even though Domrémy was a small village, the fear of war was always close. Travelers often arrived with terrible stories about English soldiers, destroyed towns, and people forced to leave their homes. Growing up in this world changed Joan. While other children dreamed about peaceful futures, she saw pain, hunger, and fear around her. She often prayed inside the village church, asking God to protect her family and her country. The church became a place where she found comfort whenever the outside world seemed too frightening. Then, when Joan was about 13 years old, something happened that would change her life forever. One summer afternoon, while she was working near her father's garden, Joan later said she heard a voice unlike anything she had ever heard before. At first, it frightened her. The voice was calm, powerful, and filled with kindness. Soon, she believed it belonged to Saint Michael. Later, she said Saints Catherine and Margaret also appeared to her. According to Joan, these heavenly voices gave her an impossible mission. They told her that France needed her. They said she must help drive the English from French lands and make sure that Charles, the rightful heir to the French throne, would be crowned king. Imagine hearing such words when you are only a teenage farm girl. No military training, no education, no political power. Most people would have dismissed the experience as a dream or a fantasy. But Joan never doubted what she believed she had heard. For several years, she kept these experiences mostly to herself. She continued helping her family while the voices returned again and again, encouraging her to stay brave and prepare for the mission ahead. The longer she waited, the stronger her sense of purpose became. Outside her village, the war grew worse. England continued to gain control of more French territory, and many people believed France was close to complete defeat. Hope was disappearing across the kingdom. Joan could no longer remain silent. She believed the time had finally come to leave her home and follow the mission that, in her heart, she believed God had given her. She had no idea that her next decision would place her before princes, soldiers, and kings, and that the entire future of France was about to change. Chapter 2. A Mission No One Believed. By the time Joan was 16, the voices had become impossible to ignore. Every day they reminded her that France was waiting. The kingdom was falling apart, and Charles, the man she believed was the rightful heir to the throne, had still not been crowned king. Joan knew that if she stayed in Domrémy, nothing would change. Leaving home was not an easy decision. Her parents believed she should live the quiet life of a farmer. Her neighbors could not understand why a teenage girl suddenly wanted to travel through a country filled with soldiers, thieves, and enemy forces. Some thought she had lost her mind. Others laughed at her dream. But Joan remained calm. She believed her mission was greater than her fear. In early 1429, Joan traveled to the nearby town of Vaucouleurs, hoping to meet Robert de Baudricourt, the local military commander. She asked him for an escort so she could visit Charles. At first, he refused. He could not believe that a young peasant girl had been chosen to save France. He advised her to return home and forget her strange story. Most people would have given up after such rejection. Joan did not. She returned weeks later with the same confidence and the same determination. She continued speaking about her mission with remarkable courage. Her faith never seemed to weaken. As news of Joan spread through the town, some people began to notice something unusual about her. She did not seek money, power, or fame. She simply believed she had a duty to fulfill. Her honesty and unwavering confidence slowly changed people's opinions. Eventually, Robert de Baudricourt agreed to help her. Joan's hair was cut short, and she dressed in men's clothing for protection during the dangerous journey. Accompanied by a small group of loyal guards, she traveled hundreds of miles across war-torn France, often moving at night to avoid English patrols. Every step brought her closer to Charles, yet no one knew whether he would believe her. The fate of her mission, and perhaps the future of France, would depend on a single meeting inside the royal court. Chapter 3. The meeting that changed history. After nearly 2 weeks of traveling through dangerous territory, Joan finally arrived at the royal castle in Chinon. She had crossed rivers, forests, and enemy-controlled lands to reach the man she believed was the future king of France. Now came the greatest test of all. Charles was uncertain. He had heard many strange stories about the young girl from Domrémy. Some called her a messenger from God. Others believed she was simply an innocent village girl with impossible dreams. Unsure of what to believe, Charles decided to test her. When Joan entered the great hall, dozens of noblemen stood around the room, wearing rich clothing. Charles secretly dressed as an ordinary court member and allowed another man to sit in his place. The plan was simple. If Joan truly had a divine mission, she should recognize the real prince. Without hesitation, Joan walked past the man sitting on the throne. She continued through the crowd until she stopped in front of Charles. Bowing respectfully, she greeted him as the rightful heir to France. The room fell silent. No one could explain how she recognized him. Some believed it was only a lucky guess. Others saw it as the first sign that Joan was different from anyone they had ever met. Charles did not immediately place his trust in her. Church officials questioned Joan for days, carefully examining her faith, her character, and the claims she made about the voices she had heard. They searched for any reason to reject her, but they found no evidence that she was dishonest or dangerous. Meanwhile, the situation in France became even more desperate. The English still surrounded the city of Orleans, one of the last major cities standing between them and complete control of France. If Orleans fell, many believed the kingdom itself would soon collapse. After weeks of discussion, Charles finally made his decision. He gave Joan armor, a horse, and a white banner decorated with religious symbols. She asked for a sword that was said to be hidden behind the altar of the Church of St. Catherine at Fierbois. According to those who witnessed the event, the sword was found exactly where she had described. Joan was no longer just a farmer's daughter. She was now riding toward the greatest battlefield in France, carrying the hopes of an entire nation. Ahead of her waited the city of Orleans, where history would soon witness an extraordinary victory that few believed was possible. Chapter 4. The Maid Goes to War. In the spring of 1429, Joan of Arc rode toward the city of Orleans. It had been under English siege for months. Food was running low, hope was fading, and many believed the city would soon surrender. Experienced commanders had failed to break the siege, and the people of France were running out of reasons to believe victory was still possible. When Joan arrived, many soldiers were surprised to see a 17-year-old girl wearing armor instead of an old battle-hardened general. Some doubted her immediately. Others whispered that she would never survive her first battle. But Joan did not come to prove herself with words. She came to inspire courage. She encouraged the soldiers to stay disciplined, protect innocent people, and fight with confidence instead of fear. Carrying her white banner, she often stood where the fighting was most dangerous. Her calm determination gave exhausted soldiers new energy. They began to believe that victory was still within reach. The battle for Orleans lasted several intense days. Arrows filled the sky, cannons shook the walls, and fierce fighting broke out around the English fortifications. During one attack, Joan was struck in the shoulder by an arrow. The wound was painful, and many feared she would never return to the battlefield. For a short time, she stepped away to receive treatment. Then, despite the pain, she returned carrying her banner once again. The sight of Joan riding back into the battle lifted the spirits of the French army. Inspired by her courage, the soldiers launched another powerful attack. On May 8, 1429, the English finally abandoned the siege. Orleans was free. The victory shocked Europe. A city that had seemed impossible to save had been rescued by an army led by a young peasant girl. News spread quickly across France. For the first time in many years, people believed their country could actually win the war. Yet Joan saw Orleans as only the beginning. She reminded Charles that her mission was not complete. France still needed its rightful king to be crowned. To make that happen, they would have to march deep into dangerous enemy territory. The greatest challenge of Joan's life was still waiting ahead. Chapter 5. The King is Crowned. The victory at Orleans changed everything. For years, the French army had suffered defeat after defeat. Now, confidence was returning. Soldiers who had once fought without hope were ready to follow Joan wherever she led them. But Joan reminded everyone that winning one battle was not the end of her mission. She believed God had sent her for one clear purpose: to lead Charles to the city of Reims, where French kings had traditionally been crowned for centuries. Without that ceremony, many people would continue to question whether Charles was the true king of France. The journey to Reims was extremely dangerous. The road passed through towns controlled by the English and their allies, the Burgundians. Every mile carried the risk of attack. Many of Charles's advisors urged him not to go. They believed the journey was too risky and could end in disaster. Joan refused to give in to fear. She encouraged the army to keep moving forward, and something remarkable happened. One by one, several towns opened their gates without a fight. Some surrendered peacefully, while others welcomed Charles and Joan as symbols of hope. Their growing reputation spread faster than the army itself. As they marched across France, thousands of ordinary people gathered along the roads. Farmers, merchants, and children came to see the young woman who had defeated the English at Orleans. To many, Joan had become a living symbol of courage and faith. Finally, on July 17, 1429, Charles entered the magnificent Cathedral of Reims. Surrounded by bishops, nobles, and soldiers, he was officially crowned King Charles VII of France. Joan stood nearby, holding her white banner. Later, Joan explained why the banner stood beside the king during the ceremony. It had shared in the hardship, she said. It deserved to share in the honor. For Joan, this moment was the fulfillment of the mission she had carried in her heart since she was a young girl in Domrémy. The voices had told her that Charles must become king, and now it had happened. Yet victory did not bring peace. The English still controlled large parts of France, and powerful enemies refused to accept Charles as king. Political disagreements soon replaced the excitement of the coronation. Joan wanted to continue fighting, but not everyone at court shared her determination. The greatest victories of her life were already behind her. The darkest chapter was about to begin. Chapter 6. Captured by enemies. After the coronation of Charles VII, many people believed the war would soon be over. But Joan knew the truth. France was still divided, and the English, along with their Burgundian allies, refused to surrender. She wanted to continue the campaign and drive the enemy completely out of France. This time, however, the situation had changed. The royal court became more cautious. Some advisors preferred negotiations instead of more battles. Others worried that Joan's growing popularity was becoming too powerful. The same leaders who had once celebrated her victories were now slower to support her plans. In September 1429, Joan joined an attack on Paris, hoping to bring the capital under Charles's control. The battle was fierce, but the assault failed. Joan was wounded by a crossbow bolt in her leg. Although she wanted to continue fighting, Charles ordered the army to retreat. Months passed, and Joan found herself leading smaller military operations with fewer soldiers and less support from the royal court. Still, she refused to abandon the people who continued to suffer because of the war. In May 1430, Joan traveled to the town of Compiègne to help defend it from Burgundian forces. As fighting broke out outside the city walls, she led a brave counterattack against the enemy. At first, the French pushed their opponents back, but soon large numbers of Burgundian reinforcements arrived. The battle quickly turned into chaos. As Joan and her soldiers tried to return to the safety of the city, the gates were closed. Historians still debate exactly why this happened. Some believe it was a military decision to protect the city. Others suspect confusion or poor communication. Whatever the reason, Joan was left outside the walls, surrounded by enemy soldiers. She fought until escape was no longer possible. The Burgundians captured the 19-year-old commander and took her prisoner. For months, she was moved from one castle to another under heavy guard. Eventually, the Burgundians agreed to sell her to the English. For the English, Joan was far more than an ordinary prisoner. She had become a symbol of French hope. If they could destroy her reputation, they believed they could weaken Charles VII and crush the spirit of the French people. Joan had survived dangerous journeys, impossible battles, and painful wounds. Now she faced an enemy far more dangerous than any battlefield, a courtroom where politics mattered more than justice. Chapter 7. The Trial That Was Never Fair. In late 1430, Joan of Arc was taken to the English-controlled city of Rouen. Instead of being treated as a prisoner of war, she was placed on trial for her faith. The English wanted more than her imprisonment. They wanted to destroy everything she represented. If Joan could be declared a heretic, they hoped people would believe that her victories had never been guided by God and that Charles VII's coronation had no divine meaning. The trial began in January 1431. Joan, only 19 years old, faced a large group of judges, church officials, and lawyers. She had no legal advisor to defend her. The men questioning her were highly educated, while Joan had never learned to read or write. Yet she answered their difficult questions with remarkable intelligence and confidence. For months, the judges questioned her about her visions, her clothing, and her loyalty to the church. They often tried to confuse her or trap her into saying something that could be used against her. Joan remained calm. When she did not understand a question, she asked for it to be repeated. When she believed a question was unfair, she refused to guess. One of the judges asked if she knew whether she was in God's grace, a question designed so that almost any answer could be considered heresy. Joan replied, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God keep me there." The courtroom fell silent. Even some of her enemies were impressed by the wisdom of her response. Throughout the trial, Joan insisted that she had acted according to her conscience and her faith. She never claimed to be perfect, but she refused to deny the experiences that had shaped her life. Eventually, after months of pressure, fear, and imprisonment, Joan signed a document agreeing to obey the church. Soon afterward, however, she was accused of breaking that agreement by wearing men's clothing again. Joan explained that she had done so for her own safety while imprisoned among male guards, but the judges used it as an excuse to reopen the case. The verdict had already been decided. Joan was declared a relapsed heretic and sentenced to death. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, she was led from her prison cell to the marketplace in Rome. Thousands of people gathered to watch. Some believed they were witnessing justice. Others knew they were about to witness one of history's greatest tragedies. Chapter 8. From Heretic to Saint. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, 19-year-old Joan of Arc was brought to the marketplace in Rome. She knew what was about to happen, yet witnesses said she remained calm. Before the sentence was carried out, she asked for a cross. An English soldier quickly tied 2 small pieces of wood together and handed it to her. Joan held it tightly and prayed as she waited. She was then taken to the wooden stake. Surrounded by English soldiers, church officials, and thousands of spectators, Joan continued to speak about her faith. According to eyewitness accounts, her final words included the name of Jesus, repeated several times before her voice fell silent. Her death shocked many people, even some who had helped convict her. One English official later admitted that they feared they had condemned an innocent woman. Another witness said that everyone watching realized something extraordinary had ended that day. But Joan's story did not end in Rome. 25 years later, after the war had changed and Charles VII had firmly secured his throne, a new investigation was ordered. Witnesses from Joan's hometown, former soldiers, priests, and people who had known her personally came forward. They described her honesty, her courage, and the unfair treatment she had received during the trial. In 1456, the church officially overturned the original verdict. Joan was declared innocent, and the trial that had condemned her was recognized as deeply flawed. The young woman once called a heretic had finally received justice. Centuries passed, but her legacy only grew stronger. Artists painted her, writers told her story, and historians continued to study her remarkable life. Then, in 1920, nearly 500 years after her death, the Catholic Church declared Joan of Arc a saint. Today, Joan is remembered not simply because she fought in battles, but because she never abandoned her beliefs, even when facing impossible odds. She proved that courage is not measured by age, wealth, or power. Sometimes, the strongest person in history is the one who refuses to surrender their convictions. A poor farmer's daughter from a small village changed the future of an entire nation. Her life lasted only 19 years, but her influence has lasted for centuries, and that is why the name Joan of Arc continues to inspire the world. If you enjoyed this journey through history while improving your English listening skills, don't forget to subscribe to History Meets English. There are many more unforgettable stories waiting for you in the next episode.